Hey, how's it going, everyone? So this is going to be my guide on how to beat the Northwest USA Challenge Mode Park on Jurassic World Evolution 2 on Jurassic difficulty. This park is definitely a little bit challenging, especially starting off, so I got some tips and tricks for you on how to beat this. So let's jump right in. So as we load into this, I'll say the thing that makes this park difficult is that you mainly have to use carnivores, and you don't unlock carnivore feeders until 2.5 stars. And you'll see that about the 2-star mark, it's going to get really tough. So loading in here, first thing you want to do is pause time. You don't want to lose any more money than you need to with the time running. And then we're going to go ahead and place down a science center. Now with your science center placed down, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to come in here and you're going to build a hatchery. Now this hatchery, you can place it wherever you want. I kind of put it over here just to the right of where you start, just to give myself enough room to put one enclosure up here in the front of the park. And then what you're going to do next is you're going to go ahead and make your first enclosure. This enclosure doesn't need to be necessarily super big. We're not going to be putting anything crazy in here. Alright, so once you have your enclosure lined out, go ahead and unpause time so your stuff can start to build. And then the next thing we're going to do is we need to power all of this. So we're going to come in here to power, and we're going to make a backup generator. And just kind of put it to where it's touching your fence. It doesn't need to be overlapping your hatchery, because your hatchery will be powered by it being attached to the fence. So once your science center is complete, the first thing we're going to do is come in here and research the viewing gallery. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to start to synthesize a Struthiomimus. So while your Struthiomimus is synthesizing, go ahead and come in here and research the staff center. So now you're going to want to go ahead and place down a viewing gallery on your enclosure here. So once your Struthiomimus finish synthesizing, go ahead and select all the eggs. Don't even worry about the traits. That doesn't really matter right now. Now, while all of those are incubating, you can go ahead and place down a staff center here. I like to get these down early just in case. I don't like to have my scientists overworked, so I like to try to get these down as early as I possibly can. Alright, so our Struthiomimus are ready to release at this point. So go ahead and release those, and then do your normal thing of making sure they're all comfortable in their enclosure. So once you get those comfortable, come in here to your research and research the improved power technology so you can get the small power station. Now once your research is finished, go ahead and place down a small power station so you can power your park with reliable power. So now that our park is powered, let's go ahead and come in here and we're going to research the core guest buildings. So now you're also going to want to come in here and research the ranger and capture teams. I was able to do this research at the same time as the core guest buildings. If you're not able to, just research one after the other. So now that our core guest buildings are researched, we're going to need to start putting down some of these buildings. The first thing we're going to put down is an emergency shelter, and then we're also going to need to place down a restroom. Now, once you get both of those built, go ahead and come back in here and build yourself a hotel. Now, the next thing you can do is go ahead and build your small amenities for each type for food, drink, and gifts. Now, right this second, they might not actually be profitable, but I like to go ahead and get these placed just so that way they're there, so it starts counting towards my overall rating. Now we've almost got all of our buildings set up, so the next thing you need to build is a response center. So go ahead and place one of these down somewhere. Now while that's building, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come back into our hatchery, and we're going to synthesize another batch of Struthiomimus. So go ahead and do that. Now once these are finished synthesizing, go ahead and incubate all of the eggs again. So once again, like we did before, go ahead and release all of these, and then just double check their comfort and make sure that they're all comfortable. So the funny thing about this is actually, if you watch our money that we have, at this point, we're actually in the profit. This is all it takes right here to get your park profitable. is just one enclosure with a bunch of Struthiomimus in it, and then all the other buildings that we placed down. So at this point, you actually should be making money. Now you see here, my enclosure wasn't quite big enough, so I did have to increase its size just a little bit. But at this point, we're actually in the profit, making money. So really getting yourself to be profitable in this park isn't that difficult. It's all the stuff that's coming up next is where it actually starts to become quite the pain. So now that your park is profitable and you have everything set up, the next thing you're going to want to build is an expedition center, because we're going to need to start looking for more dinosaurs to put in the park. So now that our expedition center is built, you can see we have all these different dig sites that are available, and we actually have several dinosaurs we can pick from. But I'm going to highly recommend you do this dig site right here for the Ceratosaurus. It costs $80,000. Now the reason why I'm recommending Ceratosaurus is because it has a much higher rating for less dinosaurs in a particular enclosure, and that'll make more sense here in a minute when I showcase how it is that we're actually going to get around this not having a feeder. So as you might expect, your next step is going to be to go ahead and start to build a Ceratosaurus enclosure while you're working on getting the genome for Ceratosaurus. Now once you've gotten enough of the Ceratosaurus genome to be able to make one, go ahead and synthesize a batch of them. Now once your batch of Ceratosaurus are synthesized, go ahead and pick one that you like the best. In this case, I picked the one with the most dominance, so that way I don't have to deal with fighting later on. But go ahead and incubate only one of these. So now that your Ceratosaurus is finished incubating, go ahead and put it in its enclosure and then come back in here. And if I click on the right thing, go ahead and incubate yourself a batch of Struthiomimus. Alright, so now that your Struthiomimus are incubated, go ahead and place those Struthiomimus in the enclosure with the Ceratosaurus. And then while you're waiting on those to show up, go ahead and fill all the other needs for the Ceratosaurus. So you'll see here that once the Struthiomimus ends up in the enclosure, right now our Ceratosaurus now has a prey, so you'll see its comfort is now at 100%. And this is essentially what we're going to have to do going forward until we unlock feeders. So you will want to make sure that you get your Struthiomimus comfortable in here too, and make sure that they have stuff to eat, so that way they're not having any issues with starving to death or anything. Now these are going to slowly be getting picked off by this Ceratosaurus, so you just need to keep an eye on their comfort and make sure that you keep enough in here for them to be comfortable. So now we do have one more research we need to do, which is the Paleomedical Facility. This will be the last building you need to really get yourself fully set up to continue on with this park. So go ahead and research the Paleomedical Facility. So the next species I would generally recommend would be the Carnotaurus. And what we're trying to do here is stay away from small carnivores. And the reason why I'm saying to stay away from small carnivores is you're going to have a lot more in a single enclosure. And by having more in a single enclosure, they're going to be ripping through Struthiomimus left and right. You'll see the further we get, the faster those Struthiomimus are going to start getting eaten by all the dinosaurs in the enclosures. So you kind of want to stay clear of the small carnivores for that reason. So there is a little bit of a snag you'll run into right here, though, where your welfare skill won't quite be enough to put out a Carnotaurus. So don't jump the gun on getting a Carnotaurus just yet. If you really want to get one out, I would recommend going ahead and hiring another staff member, or researching the ability to train your staff members up. Otherwise, what I ended up doing was going ahead and making some more Ceratosaurus. So what I did next was I went ahead and incubated 2 Ceratosaurus. I did get a little lucky here having this cheaper incubation, so I didn't have to wait quite as long. There's going to be some spots on here where you might have to wait for a minute for your money to get to where you need it to be. So if that's the case, go ahead and just fast forward time until you have enough money to put out a couple more. So at this point, it's probably also going to be a good time to go ahead and incubate another batch of Struthiomimus to put in the Ceratosaur enclosure. You've probably had at least a couple of them get eaten by now, so you're probably going to need to go ahead and refill these, especially with having 3 of them in here now instead of just 1. So now at this point, I would recommend going ahead and getting a couple more staff members if you haven't already. I chose this woman because she has the cheaper synthesis, which is going to be really nice to have. Plus, she has a little bit of welfare, so we needed that to put out the Carnotaurus. I also went ahead and snagged this logistics specialist because you are going to need quite a bit of logistics later on for some of the bigger dinosaurs. So at this point, we should be just now nearing around the 1-star mark. I know this video is dragging on. This is going to be a very long video, so hope you guys grabbed a drink because we're going to be here for a little bit. But a tip that I want to give you right here is you can see my Ceratosaurus over there eating that Struthiomimus. Now, something you're going to want to do, and this might save you from losing as many Struthiomimus, is to let the dead body stay in here for a little bit, at least to let them finish eating on it. I've made the mistake a couple times where I started to remove the body before the Ceratosaurus was done eating, and so because of that, it ended up needing to go hunt another one because it was hungry again. So make sure you let your dinosaurs fully refill their food, as you can see here with its food going up. Make sure you let them finish eating, otherwise they're just going to go hunt another one. Alright, so what I did here was I went ahead and incubated these Carnotaurus that I'd had sitting here forever. I saved up enough money to get 3 of them. So I went ahead and did this. Now I will point out that I've built up my park just a little bit more with some more amenities and stuff. But I'm not going to necessarily go into detail on all of that stuff now, because I'm going to assume that you know what you're doing with that, like building amenities and shelters and keeping all your people satisfied. Now a tip here when you're making a new enclosure, I would recommend going ahead and putting the Struthiomimus in before you put the carnivores in, just to make sure that you already have them in there and that they're ready to go. It's just a small tip. You don't necessarily have to do it, but it's one that I try to do. So as is the standard, once you get your Carnotaurus in here, go ahead and make sure that it has all of its comfort needs filled and everything. These things just need sand, so they're pretty easy. That's another reason why I like using them. Their requirements aren't very much. Now you do have to have a couple of them in the enclosure, which makes it a little bit tougher. So just make sure you incubate enough of them. So these next steps are kind of going to be up to you. Basically, any medium or large carnivore at this point is going to be sufficient. Essentially what we're trying to do at this point is get ourselves to 2.5 stars, because we really need to get to that 2.5 star mark to unlock the feeders so we don't have to constantly put out Struthi. I've skipped ahead a bit in the video, but at this point we are going through Struthi like crazy, and the more dinosaurs we put out, the more Struthi we're going to end up going through. So you'll see that we're going to start running into this issue where you're going to be going through Struthi almost faster than you can put them out. And you're going to kind of get trapped in a cycle of not being able to do much of anything else because you're putting out Struthi so much. So that's where the real struggle of this map comes in. So that being said, the dinosaur that I do recommend you going for is right over here. It's the Changosaurus. It's in Medium Carnivores 4B. Now this dinosaur has become one of my favorites to use, because it doesn't require as much space as you would expect, but it's got a lot of rating, so you can actually get quite a bit of rating out of one enclosure. Now, I found that it's actually not the best dinosaur for rating per enclosure. That's actually kind of a surprising thing that I'll showcase in another video, but that's the dinosaur I would recommend you kind of shooting for. That, and I would also recommend the Metriacanthosaurus. I did not use the Metriacanthosaurus in this playthrough, and I wish I would have. So any of those two would be a good pick. Now another suggestion I would have would be to go ahead and use the Dracorex when you get the chance. This will be another species you can add to the park that you can use to feed to your carnivores, and the extra species count is going to help jump you towards that 2.5 star mark that you're looking for. So I went ahead and synthesized the Changosaurus. I ended up being able to synthesize 3 of them, because there's quite a few in a batch, and they're about 1.3 million a piece, but they have 500 rating, so they're actually fairly good to use. Alright, so we have the Changosaurus in here now, and you can see its space requirement is not very much, especially for it having a 500 rating. So definitely one of my more recommended dinosaurs. So at this point, you should be right about the 2-star mark, which, you know, makes you think that you're almost there. That makes you think you're almost to that 2.5 star mark. You should be getting the feeders anytime. But what you're going to see is this spot right here, from 2 stars to 2.5 stars, is an absolute grind. Now, as I say that, you can see I have 3 dead Struthiomimus right this second. And this is going to be a trend for you as you really try to fight your way through to 2.5 stars. You're really going to have to keep up on keeping Struthiomimus in your enclosures. And you're going to have to keep an eye on it because it won't warn you that you don't have any more left in there. Your dinosaurs will just get angry and break out. Ask me how I know. Carnotaurus. Over and over and over again kept breaking out. Not sure why it was always the Carnotaurus, but that's just how it was for me when I was playing through this. So really make sure you keep up on those. Now what I did next was I went for Majungasaurus here. Because one of the things about this map, there's not a ton of space, so you need to really consolidate your space the best you can. Now some carnivores, it's a risk, but you can put the carnivores in together and they will cohabitate just fine. Until they don't. In which case they'll fight and they'll kill each other. So it's a gamble, but you almost kind of need to do it. So if you go into your hatchery and go to the comfort tab on your dinosaurs, you can actually see which ones they like. And you can see this one likes the Changosaurus. But even though it says that they like each other, I kept having this issue where the Majungasaurus kept killing my Changosaurus. Now these Changosaurus are not cheap, so having to replace them is a very expensive endeavor. And I really think it cost me some time here getting to that 2.5 star mark. So just be cautious of that. It might be something that happens to you. You're going to have to keep replacing your dinosaurs as they die. So the second carnivore combo I went with here is I put Albertosaurus in with the Carnotaurus. Now a little trick you may not know is that if you come in here to like the environment and you just put some rocks, these actually count towards the rock requirement for them. So you don't even have to replace the sand for the Carnotaurus. Just throw down some rocks until this thing is eventually happy. Just like that. So some advice that I have right now, as I'm sitting here, looking through my footage as I'm editing this, I'm realizing that one thing I really messed up on is I just did not put enough species into my park. And I really started focusing too much on getting carnivores into enclosures with each other, when I could have been putting out other carnivores into more enclosures. So eventually you're going to need to have some carnivores in with each other to meet the species requirement. But right now at this point, the biggest struggle is simply just being able to get to your feeders. Once you get the feeders, this map isn't that bad. There's going to be some finessing to make sure that you have enough species in your park and all of that. But really what I suggest at this point is just try to get species into your park, even if you have to make more enclosures and take up a bunch of space. Because once you hit 2.5 stars, you can put your feeders in there. You don't have to deal with these Struthiomimus anymore. And you can really start building from there. And if you need to, you can go back, remove enclosures, remove dinosaurs if need be, and then just completely rearrange. But the regret that I'm having here is I spent way too much time focused on trying to cram everything into these small enclosures when I had all this other space I could have worked with. So another species I would highly recommend is the Megalosaurus. It was the next species that I ended up going with. You could fit quite a few of them into a single enclosure. They don't really require all that much, and they have a pretty good rating. So Megalosaurus is another really good one to go with. So it was at this point that finally, after all this struggling, I finally hit 2.5 stars. So let me pull up my my tab here so I can show you how much appeal you actually need. So it really doesn't matter if you used the same dinosaurs as me, or if you even used as many dinosaurs as me. All that really matters is that you got your appeal to the same level. So it's looking like 30% appeal, or 5,000 rating total, is what it's actually going to take to get to 2.5 stars. So once you hit this point, you are pretty well set. Essentially, you can just build this park up from here as you would build any other normal park. Because once you get these live prey feeders, you just put these in there. You no longer have to fight with the Struthiomimus, which you'll see. I kind of underplayed it because I didn't show it as much because it's, just repetitive. But you're going to be constantly pumping out Struthi. It's just the way that this challenge works. But from here, it's kind of going to be up to you. If you kind of want to just do it yourself from here, you absolutely can. And you can essentially stop watching here. Now, because I've already gotten this far in it, I'm going to go ahead and, like with my previous videos, I'm going to showcase, the steps that I took the rest of the way and show which dinosaurs I used. And I'll even give suggestions on which dinosaurs you should use, even if they're not dinosaurs that I used from what I've learned later after completing this playthrough. So before I go any further in my particular playthrough of this map, one thing I want to do is I want to give you guys my suggestions for which dinosaurs are the best to use on this map and which ones to avoid. So as far as marine reptiles, I messed up and used the marine reptiles. I would highly encourage you not to use them. Same thing with the birds. They are just not space effective. This map is kind of tight. You don't really have a ton of space, so I would highly recommend you not use any of those. So as far as the carnivores go, the ones that I would recommend are the Carnotaurus, the Allosaurus, the Carcharodontosaurus, and the Suchomimus. And I know this is going to be sad, but I would highly advise against the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Spinosaurus, the Indominus Rex, and the Indoraptor. None of those are really worth it, and they take way too much space. So continuing on with the playthrough, I ended up messing up here. As I mentioned, I ended up trying to use some aquatics. As you can see, it just doesn't fit very well in here, and there's a lot of unused space that I end up having because of the shape of the lagoons. So I would really advise against using any of the aquatics in here. They're not worth it. They're fairly expensive, and the space requirements are just too much, especially since their rating isn't very high. So just steer clear of those. Don't make the same mistake I did. Now, an example of what a really good enclosure looks like is right here with the Megalosaurus. So I was able to get 7 of them in this one small enclosure. So this is an example of how these like medium-sized carnivores are actually the way to go. Now you compare that to this Attenborosaurus enclosure that I have here. And I was only able to get 3 Attenborosaurus in here. Now I did also put a Tylosaurus in here, which helps the rating just a little bit. But the Tylosaurus will occasionally eat these things, so you have to replace them every now and then. But even still, only having 3 of them in here, the rating is like a quarter that of the Megalosaurus. But the space that it needs is actually bigger. You can see the 2 enclosures right there next to each other. So it's just really not worth it. So the next dino I added in was the Allosaurus. The Allosaurus cohabitates with the Ceratosaurus. Now, it will try to eat them occasionally, as is the case with all the other carnivores when you enclose them. But if you're hurting for space and you need to put one of these in, you can put the Allosaurus in with your Ceratosaurus. Just be prepared to have to replace them every now and then. So eventually, all your Struthiomimus might start dying off. Now, a funny thing you can do is this enclosure with all your Struthiomimus in it. Once your Struthiomimus die off, if you replace your Struthiomimus with Coelophysis, you can get an absolutely ridiculous amount of them in this one enclosure, and it'll actually give you a pretty high amount of rating into a single enclosure. So I would definitely recommend using the Coelophysis if you have some space for it. And then on top of that, the Compy, you can actually take the Compsognathus and you can put it in with a lot of these other carnivores. I end up putting the Compies in with the Carnos because they work really well in there. But there's a lot of other carnivores that you can put the Compies in with. So it's just a way of getting some like extra appeal if you need it. So as you can see here, I got 34 of these things into this enclosure. Now at 21 rating apiece, that comes out to 714 total appeal. So, you know, in other enclosures that's not that great, but this enclosure is pretty small. So it's kind of a fun little way of using a tiny little bit of space to just throw these things in there. So the next species I ended up going with here was the T-Rex. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I absolutely love the T-Rex. It's probably my favorite dinosaur. But in this game, it's just, there's other things that are better when it comes to space. Because these things require so much space. When you're limited on your space on a map, it just doesn't make any sense to do them. So I ended up putting 2 T-Rexes into this enclosure. But I mean, it was pushing it for that enclosure size. And the enclosure was massive. And these things only have 1,200 rating total. So, 2,400 rating in a pretty big enclosure. You compare that to my enclosure from earlier, that Megalosaurus enclosure, doesn't even come close. So you can see here, I got my second T-Rex in here. I had to adjust this enclosure, and I was just barely able to get this enclosure to fit these things. Now, I have done some testing, and I've found that putting any more than 2 T-Rexes in an enclosure makes the enclosure essentially unviable. And what I mean by that is there's essentially a threshold where when you go from 2 Rexes to 3 Rexes, the space requirement like exponentially jumps. So really you can't even expect to get any more than 2 Rexes into an enclosure without the enclosure size becoming absolutely unreasonable. Now this, on the other hand, the Suchomimus, this was the next dinosaur I put out. And after doing some testing, this is probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite dinosaur to use in this game at this point. These things have really good appeal, and they don't require much space at all. Mix that with the fact that Suchomimus and Baryonyx can go in together without hardly any issues whatsoever, and it makes for a really good enclosure. So the next dinosaur I ended up using here was the Giganotosaurus. Now, I wouldn't recommend this one. I would actually recommend using the Carcharodontosaurus rather than the Giganotosaurus. The Giga is just, it takes too much space compared to the Carcharodontosaurus. I ended up testing it, and you can get way more Carcharodontosaurus in here with way more rating than you can the Giganotosaurus. So at this point in every park that I play, I always try to start filling in some of these gaps that I may have. So I noticed that my amenities were kind of low, so I went through and kind of reorganized some things to get some like more shops and everything in there. It's kind of a pain on this park, but it's necessary. So just reorganizing the shops and getting new ones placed in took me from 4.4 stars all the way up to 4.8 stars. And so at this point, I realized that I definitely had enough appeal and everything else, and I realized that my amenities were a little bit lower than what I would hope for. So the idea came to mind to go ahead and check all my shops and make sure that all of them are making as much profit as possible. This is something I would definitely recommend you doing, especially when you start getting close to the end. You should be doing it sporadically throughout, but you would be surprised how many times you might forget to configure a shop, especially when you start building a bunch of new shops. And going through and configuring these definitely made the difference. And so with that final last little adjustment of my shops, it was just enough to push me there to 5 stars. So my completion time was 8 hours, 11 minutes. I definitely think I could do that faster. I will probably do that at some point in the future. I'm thinking about doing it as a live stream and bringing you guys along for the ride as we attempt to get a faster time than that. So at this point, I'm just going to kind of cycle through my park and let you guys see all the dinosaurs that I have and, all the stats and everything. So that way you guys kind of know what you're looking for, about how much it's going to take for you guys to get to 5 stars. But really, guys, I definitely appreciate you guys making it this far in the video. We're at like 28 minutes now, which is this is probably one of the longest videos I've made. This video has taken a long time to make, so I really appreciate you guys sticking out to the end here, and I really appreciate all the support I've gotten on this series with these videos. So thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope this video helped you. And let me know if it did. And otherwise, I'll be seeing you guys on the next park. It'll be the Southwest USA next. So hope to see you guys there. Thanks again, guys. Have a good one.